Hello
again.
Yeah.
Okay.
The DAF will be tomorrow 6:30.
The what?
The DAF will be tomorrow 6:30.
Hmm.
Ernie called me. I put the the text out, but just in case.
Okay.
Mario, if I wanted to get the next Tzurba, can I get that from you?
From Ernie.
From Ernie? Okay.
Yeah. He has it.
Okay.
Actually, I didn't get mine either, so I have to go by his house.
I'll ask him.
Yeah. He mentioned that last week. Jorge, I found online a contact for Haverhill Touch, so I send them a message.
Your info. Okay.
I
You
hope
tell
they,
me if it works.
I hope they answer.
I hope they answer. If not,
I
you
mean,
let me know.
I send the message in Spanish as well. So
I will follow up. Please.
Okay. So we are on page 276.
right.
The concept of grama. Grama is like a secondary cause, not a direct action, like a secondary action. And this concept of grama is used in medicine. The gramophone and many of the institutions at Shari Tzedek, the Orthodox hospitals in Israel, a lot of the electricity was done in the form of grama. That means you didn't press on something directly, you pressed on something indirectly. Like, for example, when you open up a door and there's a candle in front of the door, you open up the door, wind comes in and blows out the candle. That's a classic. That's a classic case of grama. It's not direct action, it's indirect action. And when it comes to like pikuach nefesh or fafula, their leniencies was able to.
Walter, mute, please.
Oh, sorry.
So so we've talked about, in addition to the terms of malacha explored above, we talked about a malacha that you did shelo kavana. We talked about malacha she'en tzrich legufa, and we talked about misasek. So the halacha also discusses the status of labor brought about by indirect causation, which is called grama. While Chazal speak of grama in a number of different contexts, our discussion will be limited to the status of grama as it relates to Hilchos Shabbos. The Torah states, "Lo tasem lacha," you shall perform no labor. In relation to this verse, the Gemara in Masechta Shabbos explains that the definition of labor midaraisa applies only to that labor which a person performs directly. However, midaraisa, it will be permitted to bring about a labor that happens on its own on Shabbos through a series of events that the person merely indirectly caused. So in Masechta Shabbos Kuf Chav, it says, "Oisin mechitza b'chol hakelim bein lein bein reikonim bishur shelo tavor adleka." So you cannot extinguish fire directly by pouring water on it. But what this Mishnah is saying is you can build a wall of pots filled with water, whether they were empty or not, so that if fire is coming, the fire will sort of engage the pots and maybe be put out indirectly by the water that's in the pots. Rabbi Yossi oiser b'klicheres chadoshim lein mayim. Rabbi Yossi specifically prohibited using earthenware filled with water. the fire will cause them to burst. Vehem is bakin mechaber nesat leika. So Rabbi Yossi, even though the act is indirect, he forbids it. And the Gemara says, L'meimed Rabbanan Svari Gorim Kibui Mutter. The ones that argue with Rabbi Yossi, i.e. the Chachamim, they seem to be holding that an indirect extinguishing is permitted. Rabbi Yossi Savar Gorim Kibui Osir. Ksiv Lo Sasa Kom Lacha Asiyahu de Osir Grammar Shori. So from the Gemara comes out that the Rabbanan hold that an indirect action is permitted. In light of this understanding of the verse, the Gemara later established that both the rabbis and Rabbi Yossi agree in principle that indirect causation is not considered a malacha. Rabbi Yossi is machmir, stringent, in the case of fire for another reason. Although this reason indicates that it is permitted to bring about malacha by way of grama, the Ramah rules, based on the Rishonim, that it's permitted only in the case of hefsid, if it's going to lead to financial loss. You can build this kind of wall in front of fire. Even an earthenware jug filled with water that's going to burst when the fire hits it, and the water is going to extinguish the fire. Shavada yispagu kishatagilam adleka, digram kibui mutter. An indirect causation of an extinguishing is permitted. Says the Ramah b'makam pseida. He doesn't give a blanket heter. He says if it would lead to financial loss, you're allowed to do it. Notably, one might wonder if the aforementioned case can teach us anything about grama as a global principle, because the example given deals specifically with extinguishing a fire. Earlier in this year, we mentioned that the act of extinguishing would be considered a meleches machsheves only if it's done for the productive purpose of making coals. That is correct. Might it be fair to say that grama is tolerated only for extinguishing, and other cases of malacha she'ein tzricha legufa, where you're not really creating something, and in other cases, maybe only malachas that are not necessarily needed for its benefit. So the Bir Halacha addresses this issue, and grama is relevant for all forbidden labors. It should be noted, although this is the accepted opinion, the Eglei Tal writes that other malachas performed via grama still constitute a biblical violation. Says the Bir Halacha, the gram kibui mutter, lav davka kibui, dum malacha shein tzrich legufa. When you extinguish something, you're not producing coals. So it's not the malacha for its purpose. The malacha of kibui, when it was asr, was to make a coal. If you're not making a coal, it's malacha. So but it's not just the malacha shein tzrich legufa, that filu b'chol malachas hadein kain. Any kind of malacha, not just malacha shein tzrich legufa, would be permitted with grama. The Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim also discuss another scenario related to extinguishing via grama. If someone opens a window while it's windy outside and candles near the window are immediately extinguished, that is actively extinguishing the candles. But if one opened the windows and it is not yet windy and the candles are extinguished by the wind only later, this is grama, and it's forbidden only midrabanan. Some of the general principles of malacha on Shabbos have not been discussed here, including mekalkel, that is doing a malacha which leads to a destruction, and performing a malacha with two individuals instead of one. Some of these will be addressed at least briefly over the course of the next few volumes in the context of specific subjects. Many poskim also apply the principle of grama when discussing the question of adjusting timers on Shabbos itself. They assume that it's forbidden to cause the lights to turn on or off earlier than they would have otherwise, due to grama, except in cases of great need. See Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa notes that when setting the timer on Shabbos to turn the lights on or off later than they would have otherwise, the issue of grama is less problematic, since one has simply delayed the action that would have taken place anyways. The question of the status of electricity will be dealt with in the upcoming volumes. Let's learn a machshava regarding these basic concepts of malacha. In these shiurim, we have introduced several basic features surrounding mlechas machshavas, creative labor, which is forbidden midiraisa on Shabbos. In the Aser Sadibros, in Parshas Yitro, present Shabbos specifically as a day without labor. Right? Zachor Yom HaShabbat al-Kadsho, Sheshet Yamin Tavod V'Sikol Maltecha, you shall work for 6 days. Yom HaShvi Shabbos L'Hashem Lekach. Lo Sasa Kom Lacha. Ata Bincha Bitecha Avtecha V'Masecha V'Emtecha V'Gerecha Hashem Yishrecha. Ki Sheshet Yamin Asah Hashem Es HaShemayim V'S'aretz. Zayam Es Kol Shabbat V'Yanech B'Yom HaShvi. Kein Berach Hashem Es Yom HaShabbos V'Yikadshei. The great distinction between the 6 weekdays and Shabbos is precisely that the 6 days are characterized by labor. Shabbos is characterized by refraining from labor. The Torah explains that the mitzvah to distinguish Shabbos in this way reflects Hashem's activity during creation. He created everything in 6 days, and then he rested on the 7th. This delicate balance of creation and rest is explained more fully by the Sforno. The Sforno was a doctor in Italy in the 1500s. He's here, Yisader Adam Asakav V'Mei Maseh. The Torah is warning us to take care of our business needs during the work week. In a way that you can take your mind off those things on Shabbos. Our lives are very fleeting. So the work that we do for this fleeting life is like an eved. Sharov inyanam hu hayot mitzvah adam alulam she'ena shalo. He's not really, has nothing to do with this world. He's in and then he's out. In order to exist, you have to work. But then Shabbos L'Hashem Elokecha. Kulo L'Hashem. Shabbos has to be all for God. Lilmod l'lamed, lishmor v'lasos, ulasanigbo, to enjoy. Dai avodah l'chvodo yitbarach. That's the service of honoring Hashem. Ki sheshet v'masa Hashem, v'amechav mehem she'yidmei adam l'baro kafi ha'efshar. You have to try to imitate Hashem. V'zeh be'inu v'talmud v'masa b'chiri l'tzon l'fanav. Study and doing good things. Everything that had to be done had already been done. And the menucha leads to shleimus. Thus, the mitzvah of Shabbos reflects the fundamental notion that humanity is expected to create and then to withdraw from the completed creation. And in this way, humanity follows the footsteps of Hashem. Let's turn to page 295. We are going to start the halachas of Bishul, one of the Lamed Tes malachas. Right? In the previous year, we listed 39 malachas, which are prohibited on Shabbos, along with some of the general terms under which actions may qualify as malachas. The halachas surrounding the malach of Bishul, cooking, are some of the most complex and most practical halachos among all the halachos of Shabbos. In the next series of shiurim, beginning here and including those in the next volume, we will analyze and discuss many of the principles and practical guidelines concerning Bishul. This first shiur focuses on which common cooking methods and equivalent activities are included in the Av Malacha primary labor and the Toladot derivative labors of cooking on Shabbos. Other important principles of Bishul will also be discussed, including the criteria by which a food becomes classified as halachically cooked, and whether it is considered Bishul to reheat previously cooked foods. So, what's the Av Malacha and what's the Tod of Bishul? In source 5, we learned that the Mishnah lists the Av Malacha of baking rather than cooking. It says afia. After noting that this malacha was performed when preparing various dyes used for the Mishkan, the Gemara asks why the Mishnah specifically mentions baking when the original malacha performed in the Mishkan was cooking. In common speech and in the halachic literature, baking generally refers to preparing food with dry heat alone, usually in an oven. By contrast, cooking, bishul, refers to preparing food with heat using a liquid medium such as water or sauce. As we will see in the next volume, halachic authorities discuss the practical applications to the distinction between cooking and baking, as well as categorizing other methods of preparation, such as frying is tigun and roasting is tzli. The Gemara answers that this is due to a technicality, as baking is listed among other melachos that are part of the process of preparing bread. Rav Papa. Shavak Tana Didan Bishul Samamon and David B'Mishkan. It looks like our Tana took a left turn when he was discussing the preparation of the dyes that were used in the Mishkan, and you had to cook various ingredients. And all of a sudden, the Nokat Oifani, and he went to baking. Because Tana Didon Sidur de Pas Nokat. The Tana listed everything that had to do with bread. So, for example, we talk about planting, harvesting, threshing, then kneading, and which leads to baking. So there were all these preparatory steps. So that's why you have to throw in afia. The implication is that in halachic terms, cooking and baking are interchangeable. Accordingly, the Rambam writes that these actions are equivalent, and they are both forms of the same av malacha. It's not that bishul or that afia is the av and bishul is the tolda. No, they're both av malachas. Echada oifes apas, whether somebody bakes bread in an oven, or mevashel esamaichel, or you cook a food, or samamonim, the herbs, or machavim esaman, you heat up water. Hakol inyan echadhu. It's all one love. Thus, the avlach involves fashioning foods and other materials such as dyes through the use of fire, often altering the consistency of the materials, softening harder ingredients, or hardening softer items. Accordingly, the Rambam rules that the toldos of this malacha, which are also biblically prohibited, include other forms of using fire to soften or harden various substances. The Rambam illustrates this principle with a number of examples. Hamatich echad mimine matchot. You melt metal, kolshehu, even a small amount. Or mechayim esamatechet ad shetaseh gachelet. You heat up a piece of metal until it glows like a coal. Hareze toldos mavashel. This is a tolda of the av mavashel. V'chein hamemases es adoneg. You melt wax, o es achelev, which is fat, o es azefet pitch, v'akoifer v'agofris, other forms of tar, v'kayotz v'areze toldos mavashel v'chayiv. So melting a solid into a liquid. You put in a kiln clay that is soft to harden it. Chayiv mishum avashel. You're chayiv for cooking. Klol shel davar bein streifa guf kasha beish. Whether you fired something hard in fire, o shehuiksha guf rach, or you took something soft and you hardened it, it's all part of bishul. Now, how do you define bishul for liquids? Does every act of heating by fire constitute a forbidden labor? how much must a substance be heated in order to be considered cooked or baked? The Gemara Masechta Shabbos says that one may use a fire to warm water in order to wash with it, as long as the water does not get hot enough to cause one's hand to spontaneously recoil from touching it, known as Yad Soledespo. The Gemara adds that this is equivalent to the temperature that would scald a baby's belly. Ton Rabban, maybe Adam Kitin Mayim, you can take a tea kettle, Umenicho Keneged Amadura, and you could put it close to a fire. Lo bishvil sheyechamu, you don't want it to heat it up. Aval bishvil shetavik sinos, unless it was very cold water, and you want sort of that coldness to be removed. Rabbi Yomer mevia isha pachshel shemen. You can take a jug of oil, umenechaso keneged amadur, bring it next to a fire. Lo bishvil sheyivashel, you don't want to cook it. Ela bishvil sheyivasher, it sort of makes it lukewarm. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, isha sacha yada shemen. A woman can put some oil on her hands, umischabama keneged amadur, and sort of bring her hands close to a fire. The sacha livna katam, and then she can use this sort of warmed up oil and anoint her child. And there's not a problem with bishul. Amar Rav Shmuel, echad shemen ve'echad mayim, yad soledes bo aser. So if you heat it up to the point where if you put your hand in, it's going to spontaneously draw away from it, that's the trigger where you violated the melach of bishul. Ein yad soledes bo mutter. If you heat something up to the point where it's not yad soledes bo, that's permitted. Ve'echi dami yad soledes bo. Amar Rachava kol shekresu shel tinek nichves. If yad soledes bo is, it will scald, cause the skin to turn red of a baby's stomach. Thus, one who eats water or other liquids to the temperature of Yad Soledes bo has violated the Malach of Bishul. It should be noted that the measure of Yad Soledes bo given by the Gemara appears to be referring to liquids, but with respect to solids, the Malach of Bishul might be transgressed only at a later point, which will be discussed further in the next volume. One who violates the biblical Malach of Bishul for solids, one violates Bishul for solids only when the food is cooked to the point of Michael ben Drusoy, which is a minimalistic form of cooking. It's mentioned briefly later in this year. It's discussed in more detail in the first year of the next volume. Ben Drusoy was like a thief, and he could never spend a lot of time cooking his food because he was on the run. So Michael ben Drusoy is usually food that's cooked to about a third. Are women who prepare the chulent, so they have to have the food cooked enough to be eaten, to be the level of Michael ben Drusoy before Shabbos hits. Right? The chulent isn't cold when Shabbos hits. It has to be cooked already to that level. It has to be to Michael ben Drusoy. And then it can continue cooking. Because once you've cooked it, you've cooked. So even, you understand, even if there's more cooking goes on, the cooking has already happened. That's why the chulent can continue cooking, because it's already cooked. Already cooked to the level where it's already cooked. No, it's already cooked to the level where bishul has already happened. Because you see, for solids, we said, you only trigger it when you reach Michael ben Drusoy. However, one may still violate a Torah prohibition when cooking a raw solid, even a small amount, due to the principle of chatzi shir, which dictates that one who performs even part of a prohibited act has still violated the Torah prohibition. That's a different issue called chatzi shir. Chatzi shir is asr min Torah. For example, you're not allowed to eat chazer. Now, you only get malchus if you eat a kazayas of chazir. But that doesn't allow you to eat less than a kazayas, even chatzi shir. And it doesn't mean chatzi shir, it means any amount of chazir you're not allowed to eat. And at the same time, same thing they're bringing with malachas. You can't do any malacha, even part of the malacha can't be done. What is the temperature that would qualify as Yad Soletis boat using contemporary measurements? Rav Shlomo Zalman proves that this temperature is no more than 113 degrees, the body temperature of a duck. And let's learn this Minchas Shlomo, the famous Minchas Shlomo. It's the name of the Shilas and Shuvas of Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. Nir lani is daiti. In my humble opinion, I have a raya brura, I have a clear proof. The ad 45 malot Celsius, 45 degrees C, which is 113 Fahrenheit. We don't have to worry that this is Yad Soletis Bo up to a deraisa. Shari nechliku amayroy b'gemara chulin daf ches im beis hashchita tzonein o roseach. There was an argument in Gemara Chulin whether the place where you shecht an animal, is it cold or is it boiling? And even according to the one that says it's hot, the problem you're dealing with is the shchita knife with hot temperature absorbs forbidden flavors. So there the Gemara discusses the knife is only going to absorb at the end of shchita. It's only at the end of shchita that that place heats up. But before the end of shchita, there's no argument. So everyone agrees that the neck opening where it's been cut is cold. We see no argument among the poskim regarding a knife that you cut an animal with, or a knife that cut a bird. Pashut uborur ishkulaninu vein shemakom lachalek. They're equal, and there's no difference between them. So he says, "V'nebis manenu yadu amufursam, the shir midas achom shel barvaz cholok min adam." The temperature of a duck is different than the temperature of a human being. Midas achom shel barvaz bari, a healthy duck, who karov l'45 malot, is close to 45 degrees C. Human beings are at 37 C, which is 98.6. Ve'adam hayotze mibeit hashchita ole lefachos b'mala achas. The blood that comes out from the Beis HaShchita goes up in temperature at least 1 degree. If the duck is sick, it goes up 2 degrees. Chayim tfei. We've discussed that it gets hotter at the end of Shechita. And it's still, there's no argument that until the end of Shechita it's considered Tzoinen. And no one makes any distinction between whether the animal was healthy or not healthy. Up to 48 degrees C, it's considered cold. But even if they're not hotter at the time of Shechita, and we don't even accept that the temperature goes up when they're sick, at least up until 45, The Shema Hayad Soletispo. We don't have to worry that up to 45 degrees, the Yad is Soletispo. According to Rav Auerbach, the temperature of Yad Soletispo can be demonstrated from the Gemara's conclusion that the area of slaughter is considered cold, meaning less than Yad Soletispo, since the Gemara does not distinguish between the temperature of a bird and that of a mammal. And since it's known today that the temperature of this area in the duck is at a minimum 45 degrees C, it follows that Yad Soletispo will be no less than 45 C. This is the view of Rav Shlomo Zalmanbach. It's accepted by Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa. Rav Ben Zion Abishol argues that Yad Soletispo is just 104, as this is hot enough to scald a baby's belly. Let's look at footnote 5. Moore's assessment of heat specifically surrounds the issue of whether the slaughtering knife renders the animal's meat unfit if the knife is forbidden for use for technical reasons, although it was itself clean and clear of unfit substances. As in other dishes and their routine use in their kitchen at the table, clean foods and utensils become unfit when absorbing unfit substances. In the case of slaughter, absorption would be possible only if the knife or the forbidden substance qualifies as hot, which is normally the temperature of Yad Soletispo. Now, how does the Or L'Tzion argue with Rabbi Auerbach? V'nei gadol echad, he's referring to Rav Shlomo Zalman, that it up until 45, it's not Yad Soletispo. We know as a fact that the Beis HaShchita is tzonin, and a sick duck can go up to 45 degrees. That was basically the proof that Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach built. He doesn't agree. How can you fight the fact that the belly of an infant will be scalded at already 40 degrees? He needs to prove. There are other problems with his proof. There's a dispute whether the Beis HaShchita is cold or hot. There's some animals where the temperature is only 38. How could they argue with such great differences in temperature? That one mandabar says 38 degrees C is considered hot. Mandabar Acher says it's still considered cold. That doesn't make any sense, he says. The discussion of there was whether the Beis HaShchita is considered hot enough to be a Kli Rishon that cooks. It's very hard to say that this machlokes, whether Beis HaShchita tzonin or chami, machlokes b'mitziyut, that it's a machlokes regarding real facts, or it's just a halachic dispute. It's the dispute is whether it has the halacha of being hot or being cold. Really, if it's in reality, it's hot. Another opinion regarding the threshold of Yad Soletispo is suggested by Rav Moshe Feinstein, who writes that Yad Soletispo could be anywhere in the range between 110 and 160.
Yaakov, page 300.
Thank you.
Right. So we just came to the Igros Moshe. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said that Yad Soletispo is 113. The Ben Zion Abba Shaul said it's 104. Rav Moshe suggested that it's 110. Meroy lachmer kimedumi b'shir mem gimel malos Celsius, or 110 Fahrenheit, or 43 C. Hu kvar chom gadol sheyesh lochosh liat soletis. That's already You have to worry about Yad Soledes book. He checked it himself. You have to be concerned all the way up to 160 degrees. That's certainly Yad Soledes, even according to a lenient standard. The main relevance of this higher measure of Yad Soledes bow relates to reheating liquids, which have already reached this temperature. And that will be discussed later. So, the Baraisa quoted by the Gemara above at source 4 permits warming water to a temperature below Yad Soledes bow. However, Tosfos writes that one may not leave water in a place where it could reach Yad Soledes bow if left there, even if one intends to remove the water before it reaches Yad Soledes bow. That's a gzeira, right? The reason for this is we are concerned that one may forget to remove the water in time. Near the Rashba, the Hada Sharina law says kitin shum, that which we permitted to leave a tea kettle filled with water, keneged hamadura, next to a fire, hainu berichok min hamadura, but you have to leave it far away enough. You have to leave it far enough that it'll never come to cook. Putting it close and thinking that, oh, I'm only going to warm it up to lukewarm because I'm going to move it, you can't do that. Because Dilma Mishtali, he's going to get busy. You're going to leave it there until it cooks. But the Ran observes that Rashi doesn't agree with that chum of Tosfos. Perush Rashi, Zal, lo shianichim sham ad shechamu, ela kadeshi tifog tzinosan b'miktzas. You're putting the water there, it's really cold. You want to take some of the sting out of the cold. Nira midvarov, shafil karlo medura mamish, b'makam arei levashel mutter. The Ran is medayik from Rashi that you can leave it close to the fire. Kedela, as long as you're only heating it up to lukewarm. You can't leave it there. However, the Shulchan Aruch rules like Tosfos, more stringent. Mutter litain kitun shamayim or sharmashkim kneged ha'esh lafik tzinosan. You can leave a kettle of water near fire to remove some of the coldness. Got to put it far away. Ever. It's got to be far away that it would never be able to heat up to Yad Soledes bow, Yad Soledes. We said the scalded belly. You cannot bring it close enough where if you left it there, it would be Yad Soledes bow. Even you're going to move it. It could end up being cooked there. Okay. Bishul when cooking in the sun. So we've seen so far that the malach of bishul cooking involves cooking raw solids so that they are edible or heating cold liquids. Bishul is not necessarily defined by conditioning raw materials through any and all means of heating. The standard model and basis for the malacha involves heating specifically by way of fire. But what is the halacha regarding cooking by the heat of the sun? And there's a dispute of Tanoim recorded in the Mishnah Masechta Shabbos Gimel. Ein noisin beitza b'tzad ha'mechem b'yishril tiskalgel. You can't place a raw egg next to an urn of hot water so that it'll cook a little. V'lo yavkena b'sudrim. If you have cloths that were heated in the sun and you break the eggs on the cloths, you're not allowed to do that. But Rav Yossi Mater, as Rashi explains, according to the first opinion in the Mishnah, it's forbidden to break the egg so that the sun-heated cloths will roast it. Lo yishbaren al suder shehuchan b'chama. You can't take an egg, break it on a cloth that was out in the sun, so that it will be cooked by the heat in the Shmata. Nevertheless, the Gemara on Daf Lamed concludes that according to both views, it is in fact permitted to cook directly in the sun on Shabbos. The dispute pertains only to cooking using objects which have been heated in the sun, as these are not easily distinguishable from objects heated using fire. You can put food in a pit on Shabbos sort of to protect it from heat. You can place drinkable water into bad water if the bad water is cool and you want to cool your water. You could put cooled water in hot. Is it only the sheet of Rabbi Yossi, not the Chachamim? Putting it directly in the sun to heat it, it's permitted. But if things were heated with fire, also that's prohibited. Secondary items that were heated by the sun. We make a gzeira, Marsava lo gazrina. Rashi explains that cooking in the sun is permitted because it's a shinui. It's not a typical form of cooking. The shari de ein derech bishulu bekach. According to this, fire-based cooking is essential to the definition of malacha with regard to Shabbos. As we will see in the next subsection, these sources impact directly upon questions that have arisen due to modern technology, such as whether cooking in a microwave is subject to bishul. But before discussing that, it's important to note that this definition of cooking is not only relevant to the hilchos of Shabbos, when discussing the Korban Pesach, which must be roasted, not cooked. The Gemara Masechta Pesachim concludes that by definition, the act of cooking must include the use of fire or its derivatives. Amrav Chizda, Hamavashel b'chamit tveri. Let's say you took your Korban Pesach and you cooked it in the hot springs of Tiberias. Here it's Shabbos. Hamavashel b'chamit tveri b'Shabbos potter. Pesach shebishel b'chamit tveri chayiv. You're not. It says al tevashel. You're not allowed to cook the Korban Pesach. You have to roast it. So if you cooked it b'chamit tveri, it's considered chayiv. Now the question is, when it comes to Shabbos, it was not considered bishul. You're potter. When it comes to bishul of Pesach, of Korban Pesach, you're chayiv. Why? My Shabbos to Lod told us eish ba'in and veleka, because by Shabbos you need fire or something directly from fire, and the hot springs in Tveria is not direct fire. So Pesach Nami Lav told us Eshu. So Pesach regarding Tzli, it requires fire. It should have the same din as Shabbos, not considered Bishul. When it says you're chayiv, you were mevatel the positive mitzvah asay of roasting it with fire, but you enechanami, you did not violate the love of Bishul. The Gemara indicates that not only is cooking without fire an unusual method of cooking, food cooked in this manner is not considered cooked. The Eglei Tal therefore conclude that cooking in the sun or in hot springs is permitted on Shabbos because the actions and the results are different than those of cooking with fire. Says the Eglei Tal, Leil Sif Cotton, Hiktakti Perish Rashi, Time of the Becham Atzma Mutter. The reason why Rashi said cooking in the sun is permitted, they ain't derech bishul b'kak. It's not the normal way of cooking. V'yesh la'ayin de b'Shabbos, hanasa shelo kedarka kol ponim Rabbanan Oser. Still, when you do things b'shinui on Shabbos, you're not permitted to do it mutter. It's potter of a loser. V'od b'sof perak kol shah Pesach shebishul b'chamit tvera. If you cook the Korban Pesach and Chamit Farah, oichlo eino oiver mishum mevushal, you're not violating the law of eating cooked Korban Pesach, the lo chasher mevushal. And they're also, they told us you need fire. V'irak mishum dein derech bishul b'kach, If the reason was only because it's not derech bishul, fine. That's for Shabbos. Why would it be considered mavushal? Ach, birinchel dvar yesh chiluk beinim yesh shinui ba'naseh or hashinui hurak ba'oiseh. Is it, did the guy who do the act, did he do some kind of shinui? Or is the methodology, the way something is being done, is mishana? So now he says, there's a special benefit when you burn wood that goes into the bread and to cook, there's a certain benefit added, value added to the food. And that's different than cooking in the sun. That's a different kind of shvach. It's a different methodology of cooking. It's not like a regular shinui. The whole thing is being done differently. But Rav Shlomo Zalman says that this is problematic. Although the type of heat source used may have an effect on the result of cooking food, it does not seem to have any effect on the result of heating up water. Yet the Gemara is clear that even when heating water, there's a biblical prohibition. Only when you're using fire, its derivatives. Rather, it must just be that the halachic definition of cooking requires use of fire or its derivatives. Says the Rav Shlomo Zalman, Al Bisharashi cause of a kira, the time of the Shor B'chama, that the reason why you're permitted to cook in the sun, it's not the normal derech, because makam nira, she'ikar tamu mishum the klalahu, the leka bishul kim be'esh. You can't cook something unless you have fire, the toldoso, or other types of fire, v'lo b'davracha. Chada the imkain ketama shel Rashi l'chude min rabbanan litzer. Rashi, if we're going to follow Rashi, we'd say at least min rabbanan should be prohibited. And Ein Begleital Shemadaber Bizeh, the Egleital brings it. Vela Doche Gadol, he brings a big steer to it. Veker Ha'Ichachahu B'mad the Pashat like more B'Psachim. It's certainly clear to the Gemara Psachim the Mavashal B'Chama B'Shabbos Potter. It's the same thing, just like if you cooked on Shabbos, you're Potter. Who did the Mavashal B'Pesach Nami, you'd be Potter. V'Zavaret Tamud Elin Yisra Achila Shel Mavushal Mashak L'Shabbos. Why, if you have an Isser to cook, to eat a cooked corn Pesach, why should it have anything to do with Shabbos? You can't say that it doesn't cook as well if you don't have fire. When it comes to heating up water, it makes no difference how you gave heat to the water. There was a pipe made by the population in Tveria using heating water. It was not considered fire, was considered only derivative, and was only prohibited for them to do that midrabanan. So, like the passages in the Gemara and Rashi cited above, the approaches of the Eglei Tan and Shulchan Aruch will also be important in the next section when considering the status of cooking in a microwave. I'm going to stop here because this opens up a big section, and we'll continue next week where we left off by microwave. Any comments, questions, or aros?
Ernie, do we know for sure that a turkey gets to that temperature?
I mean, a duck.
A duck, I mean.
It's news to me.
Huh? How can a
It's news
duck
to me.
get to such a temperature? It's crazy.
Well, there are animals that have higher body temperature.
Yeah, but that's 100 and something degree. I mean, it's just like.
Well, we said the base of shchita. So the blood, obviously, it's got a very high body temperature.
Hot-blooded.
Yeah. It's good to eat a nice duck, especially Purim. I think my mother said that in Frankfurt, they had a goose on Hanukkah and they had a duck on Purim. I think that was the minig in Germany. Okay. Have a good Shabbos, everybody.
Shabbos.